Thanks very much, Robin, for that introduction. And I'd like to really thank the Department of Regional Australia for sponsoring this session and also the session later in the afternoon. It's really great. The Northern Australian Beef Industry Strategy. Sorry, not doing what I'm told. Northern Australian Beef Industry Strategy was developed to provide the information to help the northern beef industry grow, diversify and add value to Northern Australia's economic prosperity. The strategy is being carried out under the leadership of the Northern Australian Ministerial Forum, as Robin just told you, which is comprised of the Australian, the Queensland, Northern Territory and Western Australian governments in the spirit of national leadership and interjurisdictional collaboration. There are 5 joint projects being progressed under the Northern Australian Beef Strategy. The first one is the one that ABARES was commissioned to undertake, an assessment of the risks and opportunities facing the northern beef industry. I'll be presenting the findings of that here today. As Robin mentioned, they haven't been actually delivered to the Ministerial Forum as yet. The other projects are building capacity and partnership in the Indigenous pastoral industry, the assessment of the sustainability and prospectivity of mosaic agriculture in Northern Australia. That's a large project that CSIRO will be delivering. Optimising livestock industry logistics and productivity improvements, and roles for governments in the development of meat processing capacity in Northern Australia. So contributing to this Northern Beef Strategy, ABARES was asked to undertake a risks and opportunities assessment to identify the risks which could constrain the industry's growth and the opportunities which will allow it to expand. ABARES' report is in the process of being finalised and will be released once it's been received and considered by all the Northern Australian Ministerial Forum. I'll be presenting here some of the preliminary findings. While the terms of reference were quite wide-ranging, I'll only be focusing, given the time, on just a few areas covered by the study. I'll be looking at markets for live cattle and beef exports, some of the issues around establishing meat processing capacity in Northern Australia, and also some of the opportunities for diversification. But first, let's look at what we mean by Northern Australia. Australia's northern beef industry has grown and developed, particularly over the past 20 years, becoming a major contributor to regional economies in Queensland, Northern Territory and Northern Western Australia. In 2009-10, the beef cattle herd accounted for actually 59% of the Australian herd and around 3/4 of live cattle exports. The gross value of production from beef cattle in Northern Australia, combined with the value-added production of first-stage beef processing, is estimated at just over $5 billion. We've split the region. As you can see, the region takes in the whole of Queensland, Northern Territory, and the Kimberley and Pilbara regions of Western Australia. In our analysis, we split the region into the Northern Live Cattle Export Region, which is the red, and what we've called the balance of Northern Australia. But it's important to note that Northern Australia is certainly not homogeneous, not even the live cattle export region. In the live cattle export region, farmers' reliance on the live cattle trade really varies as you travel across the country, with much heavier reliance in Western Australia and particularly the Kimberley, and in the northern half of the Northern Territory, the top end, the Victoria River District, the Barkly. In Queensland, there's far less involvement in the live cattle trade, quite a bit up in the Northern Peninsula area, but much less than in the west. In the balance of Northern Australia, there's very little involvement, if any, in live cattle. Here, cattle are finished for slaughter, either on grass or in feedlots, and processed in abattoirs on the eastern seaboard and Queensland southeast. Now, turning to our risks and opportunities assessment, you can see here in this graph of live cattle exports since the early 2000s, how the trade has become really quite concentrated on one market, Indonesia. Live exports became a significant trade for northern producers in the mid-1990s, encouraged by a growing feedlot industry in Southeast Asia. In the 10 years to 2010, exports to Indonesia grew by about 80%, and most of this came from northern Australia. Moves by Indonesia towards achieving beef self-sufficiency by 2014 now puts a continuation of this trade at some risk. So I'll present for each of these topics the risks that we've identified for each and the opportunities. But first of all, the risks for live cattle export markets. There's a significant risk because the demand for live exports induced a change in northern beef production in some regions, in the west and the far north, towards a breeding enterprise specialising in more rapid turn-off of young cattle for placement in Asian feedlots, particularly in Indonesia. So, what are the risks facing these particular producers? Of course, reduced Indonesian import permits as part of Indonesia's self-sufficiency drive, down to 283,000 head this calendar year from 500,000 in 2011, we'll see a sharp decline in cattle exports. The live cattle trade is also quite vulnerable to fluctuations, and this increases producers' vulnerability and affects their ongoing viability. And also being largely breeding herds with a higher proportion of cows means that producers are less able to hold on to all of their stock when drought occurs. They're also unable to hold a variety of different age steers. This reduces their flexibility and capacity to target other markets without a period of adjustment to their production processes. And there's also a risk that animals may pass through supply chains which don't meet set animal welfare standards, or that some markets may be unable to commit to the new exporter supply chain assurance system. But along with the risks, there are a number of opportunities. We think there's scope for some diversion of limited numbers to other Southeast Asian markets, but of course they'll need to compete with other cattle suppliers and South American beef imports. There may be some opportunity for exports to Egypt, Turkey, Middle East, but this trade tends to be a slaughter weight or near slaughter weight trade rather than feeder steers. So the opportunities there may not be as great. There's opportunity to grow exports of breeding cattle and genetic material to Indonesia. The previous foreign minister actually started a dialogue with Indonesia on that earlier this year. And an opportunity is the Exporter Supply Chain Assurance Scheme. Achieving supply chain animal welfare assurance in other markets will lead to a sustainable and stable trade with these countries, given the investment required in compliant supply chains. This new supply chain assurance framework is designed to investigate and deal with non-compliance by particular parties without impacting the whole trade. Now I'll just turn to beef exports. Major beef export markets for Australia and for Northern Australia have long been Japan, the United States and the Republic of Korea. However, in the past few years, exports have fallen to Japan and the US, and we've diversified into other markets, which could become more important with potential expansion of beef exports from Northern Australia. Over the past 5 years or so, we've seen significant growth in exports to the Russian Federation, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia and the Middle East. And beyond those 10 markets, we've got Singapore, Hong Kong, China, a whole range of markets, but to a much less extent. Going forward, we heard from yesterday's session, if anyone was here yesterday and went to the Global Food Demand to 2050 session, that beef is one of the foodstuffs which is going to see great growth in demand, and much of this demand will come from China. The strongest food demand drivers are rising per capita incomes and urbanisation in developing countries. So overall, beef consumption and lamb is expected to rise in China, but at a lower rate than pig and poultry meats. And the growth in Western-style supermarkets and restaurants is adding to the rising demand for beef in China and other developing Asia.